Eurocentrism is the practice of viewing the world from a European-centered or Western-centered perspective. The imperialist country is presented as being superior and dominant, while the colony is shown as being weak and underdeveloped. Eurocentrism officially emerged during the decolonization period. As European imperialism grew, the idea that imperialist countries are more superior than their respective colonies gradually developed. The fact that they could establish control over the whole population of an area made the imperialist countries believe that it was their enormous power that enabled them to do so. This belief gave way to the birth of the idea of Eurocentrism. When pre-colonial and mid-colonial events and other information regarding these colonies were documented as part of history, this Eurocentric perspective was evident throughout post-colonial art and literature. For a better understanding of the idea, let's take a look at recent events that are similar to the idea of Eurocentrism. The accusation of Iraq possessing weapons of mass destruction is an example of how a dominant country presents an idea through their perspective, and while doing so, they shed a light upon the weaker country or nation involved. This was all an explanation of the term Eurocentric. Now let's further explore the role of Eurocentrism in African history and hence the novel Things Fall Apart. Take a look at this visual by European artist Comte de Buffon. Now, the idea of humans evolving from chimpanzees is a common one, but this visual suggests something different. The artist has tried to define a connection between chimpanzees and an African, a Nigerian to be specific, thus degrading the very identity of a Nigerian by linking them to an animal. To confirm the artist's intentions behind this image, let me tell you that he even stated that people of the Hottentot tribe of Africa constituted the missing link between apes and humans. This visual seems to represent the same idea as the previous one. This is an image of a black African man, Otta Benga, who was exhibited at the Bronx Zoo alongside monkeys in a monkey house by the American eugenicist and conservationist Madison Grant. Like Buffon did in his piece of art, Grant tried to establish a link between monkeys and Africans, and hence represent Africans as virtual animals.
Chinua Achebe published his novel Things Fall Apart in 1958 to oppose such negative claims about African people and culture by writing about the Igbo culture, which represents, if not all, but a part of Africa. Things Fall Apart represents African society with sympathy and examines the effects of European colonialism through an African perspective, unlike other books of the same sort that represented the society through a Eurocentric view. While most imperialist sources of this society's history represent the changes that occurred in the culture as being beneficial, Achebe has shown through the character of Ankowo that these changes are in fact something to sigh and regret about. In the novel, Ankowo is seen as feeling a sense of loss about the changes that are occurring in his culture. To best understand and address the stereotypes and misconceptions of Africa, one must know what the exact definition is. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a stereotype is a person or thing that conforms to a widely held but oversimplified image of the class or type to which they belong. Oftentimes, people think of Africa as a big country, rather than a continent. For example, they would often say, "I would love to visit Africa one day," or "You used to live in Africa, right?" Nigeria, the modern-day country Things Fall Apart was set in, is simply one small fraction of Africa's 50-plus countries. To say that Africa is one united place is very false and ignorant. Geography is simply one of the stereotypical concepts that people often associate with Africa. Africans are usually characterized as having illogical religious practices, barbaric, violent, underdeveloped, terrifying, and of course, black. These terms, although simplistic, create a strong imagery of what people imagine Africans as, despite the word Africans describing people from Africa rather than the tribal image they have created. These terms, again, although simplistic, also hold a very negative connotation. The reason why the reputation of Africans holds such negativity is because of the people during the colonial time period. They came and invaded and wanted to take over what has already been established. At first, the natives of Africa tried to fight back, but eventually the more will-powered men won. Soon after the slow conquest, these men took the liberty of simplifying the life of the ones they took rather than understanding the beauty and complexity of such culture. This is clearly demonstrated in the rapid events of Things Fall Apart. It is due to the easy conquest that makes the white peoples feel superior towards the Africans. Thus, the association between steps backwards into time and Africans was established. This type of ignorance restricts us from looking at this complex society through different perspectives. After all, to generalize an entire continent is simply degrading. Nelson Mandela is a prime example of a so-called good African. He was a president of South Africa, but represented the whole of Africa.